Good evening, everyone. I'm offering up a toast to Linwood Barclay on the occasion of the book launch for his new book. Looky there, Find You First. How exciting. So let me give you just a little brief background here. Linwood, to you, my dear.
Great to be
Linwood
here.
and I met in 2007 in Frankfurt, Germany, on the occasion of his what is popularly known as breakout book, which just means it got more attention because they were all just as good, but that's the phrase in the book world. Was No Time for Goodbye.
Yeah, that was the one.
And we've been friends ever since, over a course of 20 some books that Linwood has written. And in fact, a few years ago, Linwood was the writer in residence for the Poison Pen, a program sponsored by Diana Gabaldon and the Poison Pen. It was just a ploy to get him out of a Toronto winter because I'm from Chicago and I really sympathized with how he must be feeling in Toronto. And when was it, January or February? Do you remember?
I was February because that was also I came down and we did that fun event with Ian Rankin. And,
Oh, yeah, that's right. I have photos of you and Ian.
And we left here with snow on the ground and so forth. So yeah, that's right.
Barbara, I have cold winters too, you know, so if you ever want to offer up that gig to me.
Well, I was about to say that Peter Swanson, the internationally famous, also like Linwood, author of 7 books, his most recent one, Every Vow You Break, we have maybe 2 signed copies left. Linwood's book, by the way, we do have signed book plates because he's in Toronto and is not easily traveling. But Peter was kind enough to sign his first book for the Poison Pen, The Girl with a Clock for a Heart. Although we've never had the actual pleasure of having him here. He's up to 7 books. And what I would like to say about both authors is they are truly diabolical. I mean, honest to God, I don't know. I thought Elevator Pitch was really going to do it for me. And I did think that 8 Perfect Murders. And then you guys turn around and do better. And I think, how is that possible? Got any?
I got nothing. I
don't have
nothing.
anything to say.
Well, you really do, Linwood. I mean, you know, I look at the outer Linwood and then I think about what's actually going on in your head when you come out with these amazing plots. I don't know, Peter, as well. But, you know, we've had lunch together in Toronto. We've done all these things and you're always so cheerful and pleasant. And I go read one of your books and I think, was he actually planning to poison me with the mushrooms or was I going to be the victim of a poison butter knife or something at lunch? Do you do that to people you know, or is this all an interior life?
Are we talking to Peter or to me?
No, I'm talking to you. You're the one I'm in more danger of because I see you.
Well, I'm just a regular guy who looks at just ordinary situations and thinks about how they could go horribly wrong. I'm a cups half empty guy. It's, you know, how could everything possibly go the worst? And Toronto these days is a perfect example of that because we're still in semi-lockdown and stay-at-home orders and things are a mess. And I'd like to explain why I haven't had a haircut since November 25th because there hasn't been a barbershop open since that day. But anyway, but yeah, it's just I think Peter and I are the same. I think we look at the world a certain way and just sort of deliciously wonder about how certain things could go horribly wrong.
And don't you think that also thriller writers or mystery writers, I mean, if you murder people in your books, you don't have to murder them in real life. You're getting it out of your system.
Well, speak for yourself.
Yeah.
You know.
The real murderers are the people who are repressed and, you know, but yeah, if you you know, getting into this business about 7 years ago, and Barbara, you know this, but mystery writers are very nice people by and large. I've found that. I mean, like some of the sweetest people I've met. Professionally. So, you know, go figure.
Well, it's true, but I do wonder about your rich interior lives, which are pretty scary. So I wanted to say before Peter, you take over and talk to Linwood here with interruptions by me as I feel like it, that Patrick is going to be monitoring the Facebook comments field as well as showing off your books. So if any of you are watching this who would like to ask questions or offer up comments to either author, please put them in the Facebook comments field. Patrick will put a buy link in there and he will monitor and read out the comments after we natter along for a while, right? Thank you.
Great.
Marcel, but I'll see you in a little bit.
I love the way he just, the magic of Zoom is he just disappears. It's
Very
so funny.
disappeared.
So I do think that, I hope, Peter, in one of these questions, you're going to ask Linwood what kind of genetic counseling or studying he might have done in order to write this book.
I am going to ask him about that for sure. I have a couple questions about Find You First, his new book. I have a few longer questions. I did put together a little lightning round right for the end, where we can get through about maybe 8 questions very fast, which I think is fun. But before then, I'm just kind of curious, Linwood, I think this is your 20th book that you've published.
20th. It's the 20th sort of thriller for adults. There've been
Thriller for adults.
Other books that I don't necessarily always count. There's a memoir, some humor books I wrote in Canada that never went beyond the borders. But let's say it's the 20th thriller. That's
what I want to know is really, what have you learned from book 1? You're publishing book 20, or you just wrote book 20. What have you learned that you didn't know at book 1, if anything? And if you're not interested in talking about that personally, I'm also curious about the industry and how that's changed from book 1 to book 20 for you.
Well, it's certainly, I mean, I feel like it's always a learning process. And I feel like I know a lot more about sort of the industry, I think, now than I did all those years ago when I was starting. But I'd like to say that it gets easier, but I don't think that that's been the case. I thought, well, all this many books will get easier, but I haven't found that. I always find that, with every book, I'll make some kind of a mistake that, editors I've worked with have been, kind enough to say, well, maybe we should do this or that. And I think, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. So I won't make that mistake again. So that allows me the opportunity with the next book to make a new mistake.
Right.
And so every book is very much a learning experience. It's like, well, I won't do that again, or that didn't work. And in fact, I did one, I guess about 12, 13 years ago. I wrote one entire novel. I was already under contract. I was doing a book a year. It was 2 books after No Time for Goodbye. I wrote an entire novel, and I was writing it, and I was thinking, well, I know there are problems, but I know I can go back and I probably can fix this later. This voice in the back of my head. And the consensus once it was done was that it was a mess. And my agent felt I could probably write another book from scratch in less time than it would take to fix all the things that were wrong with that book. And so I just deep sixed that book.
Oh, really?
I never tried to fix it. Just went on and did a book called Fear the Worst. And the thing was, that was one of the best learning experiences I ever had, because that taught me, if you hear a voice in the back of your head that there's a problem, stop.
Yeah.
And try to figure it out. And so, you're always learning, I think. Everything is every time you start, you think, God, I hope I can pull this off this time.
Right. It's not, and if it got easy, you probably wouldn't be doing it, right? Because you'd just be following a formula that everyone would know at this point, and you wouldn't be surprising people anymore.
Well, I remember one time I asked my editor in the UK at the time, somewhat facetiously, I said, how many of these do I have to do before I could just mail it in and coast?
Yeah.
And he came up with a number. He said 15. And so then I got to book 15, and suddenly the goalposts were getting moved. He said, nah, not yet. And so I keep waiting for that time where I can just mail it in, but it hasn't come yet.
Well, when you're ready to mail it in, you have a book ready to go. That book that doesn't work, you can just send them that and say, this is my next book.
Exactly. That's the best. That's a very good idea.
So I'm going to jump right into Find You First, because that's the book that came out today, and it's fresh on my mind. And actually, I looked up some of the blurbs today, and I read a great quote from the Sunday Times, which has I just want to read it out loud, and I think you'll probably want to hear it, because it's a great little quote, and I have a question based on it. From the Sunday Times, Barclay has a knack for turning news stories or social trends into rambunctious black comedy thrillers full of sharply drawn fools and knaves, which was very nice. What I was interested in was the black comedy element. Your books, I think, do have always have a comedic element to them. Also a little bit of an element of fun, that you're along this sort of Hitchcockian ride. So what I was curious is this something you think about and you try and include it in your books, or does it just come naturally?
I think it comes natural, comes naturally. And sometimes I actually have to kind of try to rein it in. Because, you know, the first 4 novels I wrote were, I would out call them sort of comic thrillers.
Yeah.
I did 4 books about a character named Zach Walker. And those novels were intended to take this kind of a character and put him in sort of outrageous situations that would all, you know, lend themselves to suspense, but also humor. But, you know, I did 4 of those, and I thought it was, and my agent felt and thought it was time to sort of switch gears. And so all the books since then have been what I would call serious thrillers, but there's still, I think, are fun, humorous elements to them. And I think that often largely comes out through dialogue, that it's the way people bounce off each other and talk to each other is, I think, where most of where the humor comes in. So it's not even meant to be sort of laugh out loud, ha ha kind of humor, but it's that kind of repartee that you try to get right and try to hear how people talk. And I think that's where the humor really most of the time comes in. Even though in Find You First, there's a fairly, and I would want to give it away, but a fairly outrageous event at the end, towards the very end.
Yes.
And
it's a little slapstick violence. Yeah.
It's in fact, I even reined that in a bit. It was, and I sort of pulled back a bit on it and tried to make it more sort of matter of fact, but it is a kind of an outrageous event.
And the other thing they mentioned in the blurb was that you sort of, you often pull from current events and high tech stuff. So Find You First, and I'll let you give maybe your elevator pitch for that. Is a thriller that's really centered around these DNA tests that everyone's taking. 1, 2, 3 and me, or I forget what they're called. But anyway, a lot of people are now getting these very easy to take genetic tests. It tells them their ancestry, their ethnic makeup. It also tells them that, you know, who might be out there that are cousins to them or they might be related to. So it gives you all this information. So I was kind of curious at what point you connected this idea, this trend, or this new technology, and came up with an idea to attach it to a thriller.
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe, as you say, briefly, I should probably just explain what the pitch is for Elevate, for Find You First. And I mean, it's about a very wealthy tech guy, you know, his early 40s, made, you know, $1 gazillion, and he's learned that you can, you know, money will buy everything except time. And he's found out that he has a terminal illness. And he's a guy who's never married. He lives alone. He's, you know, and the doctor says it's just as well that you never had kids, because this is a condition. There's a 50% chance it would be passed on to offspring. And what nobody else really knows is that Miles, our character, some 2 decades ago was a sperm donor. And so there are potentially, you know, grown adult children out there that they have this. And after some soul searching, Miles thinks that he should try to find out who they are, and to sort of also to warn them about the condition, but also what's he going to do with all this money when he, you know, when he's all gone? Where is it going to go? And as he embarks on this quest to find, as it turns out, 9 potential heirs, before he can get to them, they all start vanishing one by one. And so that's the pitch, that's the storyline. And of course, this is a thriller that 15 years ago, I couldn't have written it, because, but now we live in a time where you can turn on the TV at night and there's commercials for like Ancestry and so forth. You know, give us a sample of your saliva and we'll tell you who you're related to. And I thought, and what kind of was a spark for the first idea for this book to some degree was a photo essay. I think it was in the New York Times Magazine, where someone had gone and had taken pictures just of half siblings. They found out they all came from the same sperm donor. And just like I sort of said earlier, like thriller writers look at that sort of heartwarming, kind of interesting human story and think, how could that go horribly wrong?
Right.
And that was sort of the jumping off point for this book.
Yeah, those are always the questions, those what if questions that, my mind does the same thing. It goes to the bad side as opposed to the good side. And there was a documentary, I forget what it was called. It was about a guy who was kind of this surfing beach bum in California who lived in a trailer, and he'd fathered like 45 kids. And they all found him. He was this sort of benign guy, but it was just, yeah. And of course, yeah, you throw in money to the mix, you throw in all these other elements.
True enough.
Another thing I loved about the book that you were talking about, you're talking about these bringing in different characters and what do they have in common. Your book does a great job. I love that in thriller novels when you start off and it's a character in Ohio and it's a character over here and you don't know what they have in common. It's Inspector Morse. I don't know if you used to watch those Morse television shows. And then they turned into Lewis, or on PBS over here, BBC, I think in UK. They always open up with like 3 or 4 little snippets of people doing just random people that are not connected, and you know that somehow they're all connected in the mystery. So you do that really well in the book, and I love the way you did that.
Well, and I learned one time, I was listening to Harlan Coben once and found out that there was a novel that had a huge impression on him when he was younger, that was the same book that had for me, and that was Marathon Man by William Goldman. And that's a novel where the first 3 or 4 chapters are all completely different characters and scenarios and so forth, and they appear to have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And you know you're headed towards this intersection where these threads are going to come together. But I felt that reading that book, which was I read in the 70s, that was a really novel, no pun intended, that was a novel approach at that time. That everything I'd read up to that time was just very linear. You know, like here's your murder, here's your detective, and here's the way it goes.
Great.
But this was something that was just sort of seemed to be throwing all the rules out the window. And I just thought it was brilliant. And I mean, now it's not an uncommon thing to do, but it's fun, I think, for a reader to watch, well, how is this going to stitch together? Where are we going to come together on this? And there are some elements of it, I think, in Find You First, where it takes a long time before we figure that out.
I think you're kind of halfway through the book and you're kind of wondering how one Joel, I mean, you glom onto the fact that there are some related people here, and not giving too much away because it happens in the first chapter, but they're being hunted as well. And you're not exactly sure why. You know, there's an early murder, which is, you know, something I love in a thriller. I don't like to wait around too long for my first death. I like them to hit pretty fast.
You know, kill them right away.
And you did that very well. But there's an element you're kind of like, well, how's this going to connect? And I think it's a great way to sort of build suspense and as a reader, because you know that they're somehow connected and you're trying to figure out how. So it's sort of a mystery within a mystery.
Yeah.
So on that genetics theme, and I just want to stay on that for a moment, and ask you sort of like a more personal question. I'm just curious, what do you think of this this new ability to find out everything about yourself? Do you think it's a good thing? I think there are a couple different types of mystery writers. There's some mystery writers out there who want to know all the answers, and then there's the mystery writers or mystery readers who like a mystery. You think it's good that people can find out all of this?
Well, I'm not sure whether I think it's good or bad. I think what it does is that it offers amazing potential for those of us who write thrillers and write stories, because the potential for interesting events that can come out of this, you know, to be an adult and have someone knock at the door and say, I'm your daughter, or all these kinds of things, or to find out that you've got some relative on the other side of the country you never knew about. I think those are fascinating opportunities. And I don't think it's a bad thing that this exists. I mean, I think in a lot of places there are safeguards in place so that, you know, when you provide this sample, you make it clear, I don't wish this to be shared with other people. So there are sort of some safeguards sort of built into it. But I think that it's a whole new world. There are so many things that are now, you know, it's a whole new world in terms of technology, whether it's that or, you know, I mean, the social media and the kind of chaos that has created for us in the last 5 to 10 years. And I mean, I did a thriller about 7 years ago called Trust Your Eyes that was all built around Google Street View and a kind of updated rear window in which someone's just traveling virtually through the world and thinks they've seen a murder. That's another book that I couldn't have done 15, 20 years ago. So I think these, you know, rather than pass judgment on them, on these new things, I kind of just look at them and look at them as opportunities.
Right.
What can I do with this?
I agree. I'm going to interrupt here and pause a couple of things that I think are interesting. One is, Peter, that this whole genealogy thing has allowed in real life criminals to be, identified. The Golden State Killer, for example, by
Yeah.
going to, what is it, Ancestry and Me or 23andme.com or whatever. It's raised all kinds of interesting privacy issues, but it is a great tool for law enforcement. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops, what courts have to say and all the rest of it, because, if you can throw a sample of some guy that if you have some kind of a swab and you don't know who the criminal is, and by putting it on one of these sites, you can zero in on a relative and eventually get to them, is
That's
tremendous.
Yeah, and as you say, it doesn't even have to be the actual perpetrator who submitted a sample. If they can connect it to some a sibling who provided a sample, then they think, okay, we've narrowed down the field immensely.
Sure.
No, it really is. I mean, our whole notions of privacy, I think, are undergoing radical change. But the other thing I think is interesting as an ethical question is that Walter Isaacson has a new book out, a biography of the woman who has developed the CRISPR technology, where you can actually edit genes in the womb and try to prevent terrible things from happening to babies that would be born otherwise with spina bifida and other things. But Walter said a really interesting thing in the New York Times, with which I profoundly disagree. And I haven't actually read the book, but I really, what he said something about, he was looking out his window in New Orleans and watching stream of humanity go by, and all the differences and all the variations, and he didn't like the idea of CRISPR perhaps eliminating that people might be too much the same. But think about your guy with the genetic disease that he is passing on. If CRISPR could actually prevent that, there are two sisters with Huntington's chorea who advertise in either the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times on a regular basis. Or no, it's Tay-Sachs disease. I beg you. It's a Jewish genetic disease. And these two sisters in their 20s have it, and they'll probably die from it, but they're trying to raise money in order to help come up with technology or applications so that if you know you're at risk for it, that you can edit a fetus in the womb and try to eliminate it, which leads you down all sorts of corridors about prenatal testing and all. I mean, there's really no end to where all this can go. But think of your guy, if he, Linwood, if he today, will they screen sperm donors to find out whether they are carriers of genetic diseases? I mean, think about it.
And that's something I don't know if that's the case. And of course, this in my novel, this is a condition that this individual didn't even know that he had until he was in his 40s, when he started to exhibit symptoms that were sort of Parkinson-like symptoms. And so, but I think that's not unlikely. It's not unlikely that we will reach a point where, if you're going to be a sperm donor, they will want to do some sort of DNA test to find. I mean, as someone who might be receiving that, to get a child, you think, well, I want to know everything that I can possibly know about this donation.
Such a field for thriller writers. Sorry, Peter, carry on.
No, it's fascinating. I suspect it's an ethical and philosophical question that is going to only become more hugely important in the years to come. And maybe the most important as these technologies take over. And I loved one of the children that's identified in Linwood's book is her name's Chloe Swanson. Don't know where that came from.
I just knew.
My distant cousin Chloe Swanson, and she has an interesting take when she finds out that she could be possibly carrying this gene. She's sort of like, I don't care, I'm going to die somehow. Like she's sort of the voice of, why do we need to know our bad genetics? Why can't we should just be able to live our lives. We never know day to day, like an air conditioning unit's going to fall out a window and kill you. I mean, that'll kill you before Huntington's. So I think she had a really interesting take too.
She was fun to write. I loved writing about Chloe. Is the first one that my character Miles finds and connects with, And then the two of them together continue this trek to find the others, and they all start to disappear. And Chloe was a really fun character to write.
I'm still thinking about you talking about Marathon Man and when you read that and how it kind of opened up. So I'm just going to go back a little and ask you, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, but what kind of reader were you as a child? Did you grow up in a house full of books? Were you a voracious reader? I'm suspect that you probably were. So what was your early reading experience, and how did that lead you into writing?
I think the first books that I devoured like crazy were the Hardy Boys and the Tom Swift adventures and all that sort of thing. And then somewhere around grade 6 or so, I kind of graduated to Agatha Christie. And I was reading all of Agatha Christie, and then I discovered the Nero Wolfe novels by Rex Stout.
Yeah.
So I was reading all of those like mad through that period. And then I think a sort of major turning point for me was at the age of 15, when I discovered the Lou Archer novels by Ross MacDonald. And that was a turning point, because those were just, first of all, such great books. And then there were also the fact that there was a writer who was kind of taking the conventions of the mystery novel and doing more with it. Like if he was concerned about environmentalism or things like that, he could take that as a subject matter, but then you just throw in a disappearance, or you throw in a murder. And so I was hugely, I think the single greatest influence on me was him. And my parents read books, but they weren't massive readers. My mom read a little more than my dad, but I was always buying. As a kid, I was buying those cheap Ace paperbacks or Bantam paperbacks, just like crazy. And so I was a pretty voracious reader. And of course, Ross MacDonald, I was to the point that when I got to university, I was doing a thesis on the private eye as an iconic figure in literature. And I wrote to him, care of his publisher, and he replied. And he and I had a very long correspondence that culminated in a dinner together when I was 21. And so
was he Canadian as well?
He grew up in Canada.
Okay, yeah.
He was born in the U.S., but as a very youngster, he moved to Ontario and grew up in Ontario. He taught in Kitchener, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half drive from here, and worked and taught high school there, and then eventually moved to California. And California is where he spent most. He lived in Michigan for a while too, but then he's totally really identified with California because all of the books take place there.
I got to Ross MacDonald late. Actually, a couple of years ago, I went through a little Ross MacDonald period, and I read about 5 or 6 of the Lou Archers. And what's interesting about those books to me is it's the sort of psychological astuteness of them. And I know that came out of a personal, I think him and his wife had a daughter who had some psychological issues, and that kind of wound up. Family dynamics really became what he wrote about, but within the context of sort of a Raymond Chandler-esque detective.
Yeah.
And I remember, those were great. Those were pretty kind of complex, deep books to be into as a teenager.
Yeah, I discovered it when I was 15. First one I picked up was The Goodbye Look. And my bookstore when I was 15 was the twirling metal paperback rack at the local IGA grocery store in Bob Cage, Ontario, which when you turned it always like squeaked like this when you turned it. And that was where I would go every time my parents went grocery shopping, whatever. I'd scan all the new Bandit paperbacks, whatever else was there. And I just saw that. And what attracted to me, speaking of Marathon Man, was that there was a blurb at the top of the cover that said, "The finest series of detective novels ever written by an American." And that quote was from William Goldman's review in the New York Times Book Review.
Oh, interesting.
And that caught my eye.
Blurbs. MacDonald at age 15 was John D. MacDonald. And I found his little paperbacks at, I think it was an Annie's Book Swap, and the cheap little mid-century paperbacks, and got into those. And those are, I'm still a John D. MacDonald fan. I think those were a little more, had a little more of an escapist, swinging feel to them. But
yeah, I would agree. But every bit as good, and I came to him actually later and then read all kinds of John D. McDonald like in the last 15 years or so.
Oh yeah.
And he's just he was astonishing writer, just amazing.
He wrote some great standalones too. I think he's sort of known for Travis McGee, but actually there's sort of a solid number of standalones that are really, really terrific.
That's true.
I have a cat scratching at my door, and I'm just going to let my cat out of the room.
What a good idea.
Because otherwise I'm just going to sit there and listen to my cat scratching at the door the entire time. So sorry about that.
That's fine.
So here's a question that I'm kind of curious about, because it's something that I've been thinking about, and especially since we're talking about you sort of incorporating stuff that's going on in the world in your books. What are your plans for COVID? Are you gonna, you think you'll write a COVID-based thriller?
I don't, certainly don't at the moment. I mean, I have one idea for a thriller that's sort of ever so slightly a sort of tangent off of it. But that's an interesting question. I mean, first of all, this has come up. People say I'm going to write a big pandemic novel. I think, well, somebody named Stephen King did one in 1978 that's kind of was rather impressive. And I don't know whether we need to bother, and I also think that I'm even going to want to read about it. But it's such an amazing event, or an overwhelming event, is sort of the history of the world, that I don't think you can ignore it. So I mean, I've written next year's novel, and I'm setting it in 2022, and I'm with the fingers crossed that we'll have come through this, because there are references to it. You know, the guy's got an old mask tucked under, falls under his seat, or he finds some hand sanitizer in the car, or people mention it in passing. It's not pivotal to the story,
right?
But it's happened. And I figured you either have a choice. You can either set every book you ever write from now on in 2019 or earlier, or you can decide we're just going to accept that it happened. And maybe there's a really great COVID thriller to write. I mean, Lawrence Block wrote an astonishing thriller called Small Town in the wake of 9/11. And I think it was the first novel that I had read that decided to look at that and see that it had happened, and did a really great job of it. But I'm not sure whether what our appetite will be, at least in the relatively near future, to read about this period. We just want to be done with it.
Yeah, that's sort of my feeling. I do think that someone will write a great thriller that sort of incorporates the isolation that everyone feels. Maybe the paranoia of being alone in a house, which is always can be a good setting for a thriller anyway.
I do have one that's sort of percolating that in fact kind of is about Zoom, but whether I'm going to do it or not, I haven't decided, because even if I were to write it, it wouldn't be out until 2023, and so I don't know. It's much to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could add that something I think is interesting, because I've just been filling out all the fall event grids, so I know what all the books are coming out now into December. And there's a surprising number of books that are being written about the 1918 flu pandemic.
Oh yeah,
maybe a kind of response to COVID, but because we know what happened, it's easier to write about. I mean, one of the real dangers of writing about COVID, which Linwood has already touched about, is we don't know how it's going to come out.
Oh.
So anything you write about it right now may very well date your book, or make it implausible. So there's a danger too. But I find it intriguing that, I mean, the 1918-19 flu hasn't been that prevalent in literature, but all of a sudden there are a whole bunch of books that are coming out.
I noticed in Michael Connelly's latest, his book finishes just as
March.
the beginning, and there's a reference to that. So I'd be curious to see what he does with his next one, because he's always seemed to write in real time, as to what's happening.
Yeah, to me, it's different than 9/11, which was a huge event, but you didn't have to mention it in your book because but COVID affects everyone on a day-to-day basis. So you can't just have people in 2020 walking into bars and meeting strangers.
That's right.
No one's doing that. I mean, you can have it, but it's going to have to be an underground, secret, anti-COVID bar or something like
I
that.
mean, we only just set all our books in New Zealand.
That's
And
right, New Zealand or 2019. I just think my
Yeah.
books will be perpetually set in 2019. But I mean, that's my plan for right now. I mean, I will consider it as it goes along. But I mean, I am interested that you've mentioned it in your next thriller.
yeah, I figure I've got at least several more months that I can edit it or tinker it or take those, do something with those references if I need to. But I think I think the way I've done it, it's safe enough to leave it.
So I don't know if Patrick's planning on coming in with questions from Facebook. I'm trying to think because I do want to get to my lightning round. Well, let me ask you one more thing because this is something I've noticed dipping into your books for this interview is you have a lot of movie references in your books, and I think you have the same brain as mine, which is you instantly go to movie references and not real life references.
Well, I noticed, and in yours, you often go to literary references or crime fiction references.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I like referencing in general. But yeah. So, I'm as an author, you're always asked who influences you and who you read. I'm curious if any movies in particular or filmmakers influence you as a writer.
Yeah, I think, well, certainly the first one is Hitchcock. My two favorite movies, not just my two favorite Hitchcock movies, but my two favorite movies ever. And here's proof. If you just look up at the wall here at this photo, and I have this portrait of Mr.
There he is.
Right up there.
Looking down at you with like a little bit of like disdain, I'd say.
Yeah, it's sort of like, oh, you think you're so smart.
Yeah, you can do better than this book.
And so certainly Hitchcock is a massive influence on me. I think it was his particularly Rear Window and Vertigo are my two favorite movies ever. Even though Vertigo is just a ridiculous plot that could go wrong 100 places. I mean, why didn't the guy just push his wife down the stairs? It would have been so much easier.
No, it's so complex.
But I love it. And so certainly him. And I guess another one, even though he has sort of fallen out of favor, is of all people is M. Night Shyamalan, or however you pronounce his last name. Because when I saw, if you look at the movies like The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable and Signs, those three movies, and also this is true, I think, but I'll get to this in a sec. What I really loved about The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable was that he showed us the clues right in front of us, right before our eyes, but we didn't see it. It was this wonderful kind of sleight of hand that when you watch it the second time, you think, why did I not see that? And so I really love that. And he does that in those three movies in particular. And I quite like it. And another one who I kind of interesting technique, I think, of all people, is J.J. Abrams. And what I saw him doing when I started watching, the first series I saw of his was Alias. And I would see this in Alias. I saw it when he did the Star Trek reboot, the first one.
Yep.
And J.J. Abrams, I think, realizes that we all now collectively have ADHD. And we're not patient enough to wait for the story to progress in its natural linear way.
Right.
We can't wait for that. So what he does in Alias is, or if he does in Mission Impossible 3, is he starts with a horrific suspenseful event. Somebody's about to be killed, someone's being tortured. It's like, holy mackerel, we've only just sat down, we haven't even eaten half popcorn yet, and we've already got this crazy event that's happening, and then it ends, and then you get 3 days earlier.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Because
he started that, didn't he?
He really did. And that's why, like in Find You First, we start with this murder.
Right.
Because if I tell Find You First in a straight linear form, it's going to be a long time before we get to the really, the nasty stuff. And so I think we need to find a way to get your attention and grab you by the lapels right away, so that once we get past that scene, you're sitting there and you think, well, I know something big's coming, so I'll wait.
Yeah.
But if I didn't know about that, I might think, you know what, I'm gonna do something else. And so those two techniques, I think, are of more recent filmmakers have sort of caught my attention. And then, but all the way back to Hitchcock. Hitchcock talked about how you know, the scene, it's like in The Secret Agent, that or whatever, that movie that he based on the Conrad book. There's way more tension if you know that the box on the bus seat has a bomb in it.
Yeah.
And you're waiting for it to go off. That's way more effective than the surprise of it going off and you didn't know it was a bomb.
He does amazing things with perspective where as an audience member, you often know more than the characters on the screen. And it puts you in this sort of unbearable level of suspense where
you want to scream at them and say, "Dude, look over there." Right. You know, I know. And he's very good at that. And I mean, the genius of Rear Window is that you sit and you watch that movie and you're kind of doing this with Jimmy Stewart. You're trying to see across the courtyard and down the hallway. And that's a genius movie too, because you only know what he knows in that movie.
You do.
But the fact that you only have his perspective and it's unfolding for you just as it is for him is why it's such a genius picture.
I think that movie's become more and more important in terms of the culture we live in, which is that's a movie about screens. Way before we even ever had the word screens. This is Jimmy Stewart, who over here he's got Grace Kelly, the most beautiful woman in the world, who's like, marry me, be with me, and all he can look out is the window and there's screens for him, and he's wondering what's happening out there because he's so caught up in this sort of passive entertainment that he's missing his own life. And this is who he is. He's someone who looks at other people. And I think there's this great subtext in that film of like being an audience member. Of course, he eventually becomes involved in what's happening out there. I mean, there's some differences, but I do think about how much that movie has to say about movie going and TV watching. In a way, it was sort of ahead of its time and how we all are addicted to peering into other people's lives.
Well, it's also
instead of paying attention to our own.
If it were being made today, Grace Kelly would just ask him to please get off his phone.
I know, exactly.
You just lock your phone for a minute, you know.
I know.
Like
And it's
Instagram,
like-
you know, it's like people, you know, spending their time scrolling through Instagram and other people's
is.
lives. And in fact, we're doing events for 2 books this month coming up fairly soon, in which that is the whole background, the whole subtext of the plot is, you know, people desperate to equal those lives on Instagram and what they will do to achieve that. And I find those hard because see, my natural reaction is just don't look at it. It's not going to affect your life if you don't look at it, you know, but people don't seem to be literally able to put their phone down. You know,
Well, it's been designed as an
more real.
addiction device. I mean, it's a very addictive thing, and especially if you've grown up with it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So tell you what, let's see if Patrick has anything to contribute. We're not under any time constraint, Peter. So, you know,
Oh, good.
so we can.
I just want to hit him with my lightning round.
I hear you, but we don't need to jump off at any particular time. So Patrick, anything you'd like to report or comment?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of interesting comments and questions coming in. Let's just kick it off with this one. Gail asks, Linwood, will Detective Barry Duckworth from Promise Falls make an encore appearance?
I don't know. I did the last Promise Falls book I wrote was Parting Shot, and there have been I think 3 new books since then. I haven't gone back to Promise Falls, and at the moment I don't have any plans to. So we might have seen the last of Cal Weaver and Barry Duckworth, at least for a while. For a while there, we had for like 3 years we had the possibility that there might be a Promise Falls series, and that fell apart a couple of months ago. And up until that point, I thought, well, geez, maybe I would go back to it. But at the moment, I would say we probably won't see Barry again, although he was a lovely guy. He had a real weakness for banana bread.
Hey, the pandemic bakery thing, right? Rob keeps our freezer full of banana bread. It's wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, here's a question from Hugo. He has a couple of good ones, actually. Question for Linwood. Do you have an idea for a crime plot involving railway train models?
In fact, now, of course, that comes because I'm a model train nerd and I have a rather massive, elaborate layout in the basement. And because, you know, my comment, I mean, I've always loved doing that, but my comment is when you imagine a world all day long on a screen. It's nice to go make one with your hands, you know. And in fact, I have had a couple of ideas that kind of incorporate in a very dark, nasty way model trains. And there might be a day when I kind of incorporate that into a book. It's not one that's coming right away, but I actually do have a couple of things floating around.
Interesting. I heard recently that Rod Stewart, of all people, has an incredible.
Rod Stewart has the most astonishing private model railway that maybe just about anybody. In fact, when Rod Stewart goes on tour, he brings with him all sorts of model kits to make and sets up a big table in his hotel room and with all his paints and his glue and stuff. And when he finishes a concert to come back and unwind, he builds these elaborate, beautiful little structures. I mean, he may be a hotshot pop guy, but you know, Rod Stewart, I swear to God, Rod Stewart has made the cover of Model Railroader magazine twice. I think it's probably his crowning achievement.
Have you met Rod Stewart?
I have not. Have you? No, I have met him, but he's a well-known model train geek.
Are there any other notables that you can think of?
Frank Sinatra was one. He had a separate building behind his home that was filled with the large-scale Line L trains. He was huge in it. Apparently, some other people. I know. What was his face? The guy, the Michael Gross, I think his name is, from Family Ties. He's in it. There's a few, but the other one who's huge in it is Mandy Patinkin.
Huh.
Mandy Patinkin has a barn on his property that's refurbished. That the whole barn is filled with one huge, massive model railway. So, I have that in common with him, but I can't sing, and I wasn't in Homeland.
There's got to be a plot there somewhere.
Yes, I think so. Oh, and the other one is Neil Young. Neil Young. In fact, Neil Young was, for a period of time, I don't know if he still is, was a part owner of Line L trains.
I'll be darned. Wow. Rose has an interesting comment. She says, I just read Inheritance, the memoir by Donnie Shapiro, where after a DNA test, she finds out that her biological father was actually a sperm donor. She didn't know any of this until her parents had died, and she finds out the father she adored and thought was her biological father actually was not. I think there may be more of this than we realize. She's probably right.
Oh yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that there are maybe an awful lot of surprises out there. I mean, I think that there could be a lot of surprises for you. Might suppose you were to find out that your own child, who you thought was your biological child, from the woman you're married to, was not. You know, so there's as I said earlier, this situation is the potential for plot lines is somewhat limitless.
I think there are a lot of parents out there who are probably hoping their kids don't send away for the $60 kit.
That's right.
Do you know that you can do this? I'll interject this because we have done it. Do you know you can do it with your dog? We have this adorable rescue dog, and we were so fascinated. We decided that we would like to know what she is. I mean, we can't actually trace her specific ancestors. But anyway, we did the whole thing with the swab and sent it away and came back, and they gave us the whole printout of, you know, she's part Shiba Inu and part terrier and part something else. And it's really interesting, you know, that they can take this down to not just people, but, you know, to pets, and at least find out what their mix is, if not specifically who their parent was.
That's
That
interesting.
could be the sequel to Cujo.
Right.
Let's see. Marion asks, for Linwood, I've noticed a shift from the comedic thrillers you've written to more serious thrillers, sometimes with political overtones. Do you think you'll continue in that vein? Perhaps writing about social justice issues?
Well, yeah, at first, I think I've steered away from the comic ones quite a while ago, but every once in a while, in the ones I'm doing now, issues that are of concern to me kind of can sneak their way in. I mean, certainly in Elevator Pitch, there was a kind of there was a bit of a subtext of sort of the partisan divide that's going on in the U.S. and a rise of a rather somewhat scary right-wing group that was part of that story. But then other issues that concern me, like I worked for 30 years in newspapers, and the decline of the newspaper industry and how people are going to get local news and so forth. It's another issue that concerns me, and that's come up in more than one of my books. So every once in a while, when there's something that's really, I got an axe to grind about something, I will see if I can find some way to sneak it into the story.
Let's see here. Okay. Kim asks, she says, what authors do you read in your spare time? And then her second question is, excuse me, Barbara, are your allergies killing you? Everything's in bloom. I'm sorry.
Yours, but yes.
Yeah. And then the second question is, I requested a hand-delivered copy to Wasaga Beach. What happened? LOL.
What?
I'm not sure.
I don't get up that way anymore. We used to have a place in Owen Sound, but I head the other direction out of Prince Edward County. So apologies. But the question was, who do I read? Is that what that was?
Yeah, it's probably applicable to both of you.
Yeah, Peter, who do you read?
I sort of bounce back and forth between going down the rabbit holes of sort of usually like golden age or mid-century mystery writers. So I'm always have someone I'm sort of getting into from that end. And lately I've been reading Josephine Tey, who's this really interesting, odd Scottish thriller writer who wrote, how many books did she write? Not many, Barbara, right?
No,
Like,
it's 7 or 8. But you know what I love? We did a whole thing, several authors and I, about Josephine Tey, which I'll send you the link to it because it's fascinating. Josephine Tey, every one of her books is about reputation. The Franchise Affair, the one about Richard III, which name I'm currently blanking out. But
Daughter of Time.
Thank you. The Daughter of Time. Every one of her books, Brad Farrar, so forth, concerns reputation. And I often wonder how she would function today. I think she's a really brilliant writer, and not considered to be one of the stars of the golden age, but I think she's amazing.
And one of the great things about her is that her books are all quite unique and different. I mean, she has mystery novels where the murder takes place toward the end of the book, and or there isn't. I mean, she comes up with these sort of very odd things that all somehow work because she's such a quirky and funny writer. So I've been enjoying her. I'm trying to think. Should always be prepared as an author to be asked this, but my mind tends to go blank.
That's true.
But I've enjoyed the Carolyn Kepnes books and the You series, which are kind of odd little serial killer books where they're narrated by Joe Greenberg, who is a bookstore, works in a bookstore, and winds up killing a lot of people, not really because he plans to, but because he sort of has to. It's a little bit of a Ripley that way, a Tom Ripley. But he's really just searching for love. So when people disappoint him, he ends up usually killing them. They're really kind of fun and dark and really great pop culture reads for the time. So I've been enjoying those, and I think they did turn him into a decent Netflix series, but I think the books are better.
Yeah, they're breathless. When you read them, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
The pacing of them. We did an event with her too. I'll send you both those links because you'll really enjoy them. She's terrific. She was really fun to talk to, didn't you think, Patrick?
Oh yeah, she was great.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah. Let's see. Somebody's asking about can we show that Scottish writer's name, Josephine Tey? I'll put it in the comments field.
This is a terrible book cover. This is just on my desk. What's funny about this is this is Miss Pym Disposes. This book was written in 1948, and it takes place at a college for girls to learn to become gym teachers, a physical college. But this cover was done in obviously 1989.
How did Jamie Lee Curtis get on the cover of that book?
I mean, it's the silliest thing. But anyway, that is that's Josephine Tey, who's very good.
This is a really interesting question that David just came up with. And for both of you, what are your biggest fears? The therapy session has now begun.
My biggest fear. I don't know. I think that I think that's a good one for Peter to go first.
Wow, you just passed that along. As a writer, as a human, I mean, I think as a writer, I think Linwood touched on it a bit, which is sitting down to start a book and being like, what if I can't do this anymore? What if it just doesn't come? What if it's all gone? And then you get into it and it's still there. So that's a fear. I mean, it's not necessarily a life fear, because I think I would still have good parts of my life if the writing part went away. I mean, if I'm really honest about like genuine like phobia type fears, I have an enormous fear of being buried alive, like the Edgar Allan Poe story where he puts the guy in the wall. I think I read that when I was,
The Cask of Amontillado.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's a very scary story, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my turn now. Eh? So I don't know. I think that my fears or anxieties still have less to do with work than I think we always worry about our kids, even though they're grown, and how, what is going to happen to them and how they're going to do. And I think on a much sort of broader, big picture scale, I think my big fear or concern at the moment is the sort of global embracing of misinformation, and how people are willing to against all reason and common sense to accept things that are so blatantly and obviously not true. I think that's the biggest threat that faces all of us at the moment, is this people making money off this information and people who are dumb enough to believe it. That's a huge worry for me.
And it's not just, I think about that too. It's also how smart the people are who are delivering the information.
Yeah.
The Cambridge Analyticas of the world are mining our information, and they know exactly psychologically how to deliver information that people will believe that's not true.
And turn it into money. There's a really interesting article on Sunday in the Arizona Republic about this insane recount that we're doing here in Arizona with cyber ninjas who don't know what they're doing and all the rest of it. And he pointed out, the guy that wrote it, that this was basically the Nigerian prince scam in action. That what they were really doing was doing this nutty thing in order to get people to donate money to make it happen. In the same way that the whole myth of he lost the election was a gigantic moneymaker. And I think, I find that it may not be true, but I'm so logical, I find that easier to accept, that it is a fundraise, a money generator, than that they actually believe it.
Totally believe that. And that's sort of cynicism that takes advantage of the fact that I think that we're living in a time where 30 to 35% of the population is just completely impervious to facts.
Yeah.
That they just are, it's like a kind of reverse superpower. Facts just don't work for them. And that scares me.
With reason.
P.T. Barnum on a grand scale, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Any other question before we revert back to Peter?
Yeah. Hugo has a good one. He says, question for both authors. You both write in quite recognizable subgenres, but are there any other subgenres of crime fiction that you have considered? Are there maybe any other type of writing or genre in general?
I actually have a book that's coming. I don't think we're going to see it this year, but I think we'll see it next year. And I don't even know at this point if it will be an ebook only or in print or so forth. But I wrote a novel about 3 years ago that was more of a Michael Crichton kind of a thriller. And my publishers liked it, but they didn't quite know what to do with it because it was different than what I typically do. And to sum it up in a nutshell, I sort of describe it as, think Jurassic Park, but instead of dinosaurs, it's self-driving cars. And it's a island community that's doing a test run and every car on the island is going to be a self-driving car, because that's the best way to test them if there's no regular cars on the road. And a virus gets introduced into the system, and what you basically have is 1,000 Christines. And so that's written, it's done. I've called it, I have a title for it, it's called Look Both Ways. and it's finally coming out. So that was, for me, was a departure.
Yeah.
It was a different kind of a book than what I typically write. And then over the last few years, I actually wrote 2 thrillers for younger readers called Chase and Escape. I thought it sort of dipped my toe into that market. So, I mean, I think my real bread and butter is the kind of thriller that the standard adult thriller that I do every year. But I've had a couple ideas, and I have another one that I would call sort of a Michael Crichton kind of a thriller. And I might just do it at some point. How about you, Peter?
I think a little bit of a dream or a hope to one day write a supernatural thriller. Really, what I'm interested in is sort of a classic haunted house ghost story. I have a couple of ideas, sort of a gothic story with a twist. I often have gothic elements in my book that wind up not being supernatural, which I like as well. But I do think that, like, one thing I would like to try my hand at something that turns otherworldly at one point. And I suspect if my editor is listening to this right now, he's probably not, but if he is, he's like, don't do that.
I know they don't want us to branch out, do they?
No, they don't. Which, you know, but that is a sort of, I guess, a slight bucket list item for me.
So Patrick and I should confess, we spend our lives reading crime fiction, but I'm willing to admit that I am actually, by nature, a romance reader. Actually, Regency romance is my favorite thing. Georgette Hare, to me, is like God. And I love biography. I could spend my whole time reading biographies. I'm absolutely fascinated with them. Patrick, what is it that you, if you're not reading crime for our normal work, what would you be reading?
Oh man, lots of different. I love true crime, and I love how true crime is kind of. It's not. There is the salacious, sensationalistic side of true crime, but there's also kind of this interesting hybrid of, narrative nonfiction, for lack of a better term, and true crime. I love history. I love biography, all kinds of stuff. We all have our guilty pleasures, though, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I might just do my. Oh, if you've got more, Patrick. If not, I'd love to hit them with my lightning round, because some of them were questions that actually came up earlier.
Yeah. No, not. These are all good questions, but they might be some that you come up with.
All right, let me just go. Here we go. You ready, Linwood? This is lightning,
Okay.
so you don't need to spend a lot of time. And what's really funny is I actually wrote this down without knowing you or talking to you. One of my questions was Rear Window or Vertigo, and I'm going to make you pick between those two. So which one is it?
Oh God, I can't. It goes back and forth all the time. I'm going to say Vertigo, and here's why. Because even though I love them both, I think that the last 5 minutes of Vertigo are the best last 5 minutes of any movie ever made.
Good answer. Rolling Stones or the Beatles?
Beatles.
Okay. Do you write to music?
No, can't do it.
What was the first book written for adults that you remember reading as a kid?
I don't know. Do I get the Christie and Rex Stout count?
Yeah.
If they don't, I'm going to say maybe when I was, I don't know, maybe 13, I read Mario Puzo's The Godfather. And I read certain passages over and over again.
Yeah, I know those passages. I think it's about page 72.
Somewhere, I think it's even sooner. It's at the wedding, it's upstairs.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's that might be, if we talk about being more adult, that would probably be a book that was more adult than others.
What was the last book written for children that you read?
I guess mine. But I'm trying to think if I've read anything that would be as characterized as that. I think I'm drawing a blank on that one.
That's okay. These are lightning. We can pass.
All right.
Go back to it. It's like a game show. Have you ever used the name Linwood for one of your characters?
No, it's a stupid name. Stupid. Although I heard from Lee Goldberg the other day, he said that he has a character in his new book that he called him Linwood based on mine. So anyway.
Okay. What's the last TV show that you enjoyed?
You know, we binged, and of course, we've had the opportunity to binge a great deal in the last 13 months. Our son had really enjoyed, our grown son had said we should give Fringe a try.
Yeah.
We had never watched. Also, a few months ago, we started, and 100 episodes later, we finished it last week. It's good. We liked it.
You dropped out there. What was it that you said?
Fringe. We watched all 100 episodes. If you have 100 hours to kill,
Fringe, yeah. Fringe is
there are
perfect.
100 episodes of Fringe.
Fringe was
and
great.
We got through all of them in about 2 months, and so that's been our last major binge.
My last one, I'll just say, what's a recent movie thriller that you really liked? Something in the last sort of, say, 10 years. Has there been something you've seen that you enjoyed?
Well, you know what's funny? Last night, we watched The Manchurian Candidate, the John Frankenheimer, Frank Sinatra, Lawrence Harvey, Angela Lansbury. We watched that last night. We had recorded it off TCM. I hadn't watched it in years, and it's a great thriller. It's a great movie. It's beautifully shot. It's, I think, quite daring for the time that it was made in the early 60s, in this sort of surreal approach at the beginning and how it's done. It was a great thriller. And I mean, but if we want more recent, I just know that anytime I'm flipping through the channels, if I land on any of the 3 Matt Damon, Jason Bourne movies, not the one called Jason Bourne, but any of the other 3, doesn't matter which one it is, doesn't matter at what point we are in the movie, I can just start watching it.
Good answer.
So Patrick, anything else?
Well, you mentioned Lee Goldberg, and I was just thinking, you know, his brother Todd has the best dog name. You guys know it?
What is it?
Todd Goldberg's dog is named Rube Goldberg. I think that's a great name for a dog. Yeah, a couple more quick questions. Let's see. This is for both of you. Greg asks, are you both able to choose a favorite from among your own books?
Peter?
Most parents have a favorite child. Come on.
The one that's closest to me is 8 Perfect Murders, because it's a lot of it is about being a reader, and this bookstore owner who makes a list of his favorite fictional crimes, and then they start to happen in real life, and I just that one's very close to me in terms of the character of Malcolm, who's very different from me in many ways. Him, when he talks about, you know, the books he loves and what he was like as a young child and a voracious reader, that's sort of my autobiography through him as a reader.
Now, I have to say, Peter, that now I haven't read the book you wrote. Is it the one called, is it The Girl Who Thought She Was a Clock, or what's the title?
The Girl with a Clock for a Heart.
The Girl with a Clock for a Heart. I just think that's a perfect title because I think it applies to the other books of yours that I have read, because they kind of go together like a Swiss watch. And so I've read 8 Perfect Murders, and I've read Every Value Break, and they kind of just go together like that. You know, it kind of comes together. And for me, it's a favorite book. I think it's probably the one that always comes to mind is Trust Your Eyes, which I think I did about 8 years ago. It's kind of, I think, my own favorite, although I don't know if it's my best book or not, but I think it was one of the best concepts I have. And that was the one that, again, was a kind of updated Rear Window of a guy who's obsessed with maps, who spends all of his time traveling the world virtually and remembers everything that he's seen and thinks he sees a murder in a window that would have been captured by some Google Street View car maybe months earlier, who knows. And that book's kind of special because in some ways too, that particular character is in some ways is sort of informed by observations of my own brother, who's has suffered most of his life with schizophrenia. And so that book I'm kind of pretty happy with that one.
I think that's about it, Barbara.
All righty. righty.
Yeah.
This has been fabulous. The diabolical duo. I swear you both are. It's just amazing. And Linwood, I can't remember if we talked about it or we found out afterward with elevator pitch that they're actually considering smart elevators, and particularly in relation to COVID, where one person at a time goes in and the elevator takes you automatically to where it is that you need to go. Talk about an increasing lack of privacy. I mean, that's
Still
really
got the problem that they don't want too many people on it at a time. That's the part that's tricky.
And while it's taking you in the elevator, it's reading your DNA and telling you who you're related to.
If people are
Right.
going to
That's
go
what we
back
want.
to working in high rises and so forth, elevators are going to be a more important part of your life. You're on the 89th floor, you're not walking. So, I think that book has legs in a different way than some of the others, just because I think that, strangely enough, elevator technology is going to be a more important part of people's lives than one might think. And so if you have an elevator that's programmed to
I think they're going to design elevators. They're going to start to design elevators with sort of a grid of plexiglass dividers, and you'll go in and stand in a little spot about this big, so you don't have to touch anybody else. That's what's coming.
Wow. Anyway, guys, it's really been a pleasure. Peter, how kind of you to take off some time to join us this evening and to quiz
Thanks,
Linwood.
Judy.
No, it was a pleasure. My pleasure, for sure.
I'm so glad you two got to meet, because as I say, I assumed you actually knew each other, but this has been the debut of perhaps a promising friendship, as well as the launch of Linwood's wonderful new book. So Patrick, can you hold them up one more time to remind everybody, since you've got them there?
While I'm doing that, there was actually a comment that came in, or a last question, which is from Betty. And she said, "You're both new authors for me. What book where should I start first? Is there a good starting point that you would recommend?"
I mean, I think you could start with Find You First. Although a lot of people, a big breakout book for me was a book called No Time for Goodbye. So, I mean, you could start with either one of those, or Trust Your Eyes.
I think my breakout book was The Kind Worth Killing. That's the book that I think I get the most reader response on continually. So maybe that's a place to start for me.
Even more than 8 Perfect Murders, really?
I think so. Yeah. In terms of hearing from people talking about the character of Lily. Yeah.
Did you mention, Peter, what you had coming next?
I do have a book coming out. It won't be till March, and I'm not quite at the point of talking about it, but it's a play on it's a modern day play on Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, that does not involve an island, at least not a literal island. So
Wonderful.
I'll leave it.
Well, here's our chance. If you have a book coming out in March, it'll be much nicer in Scottsdale than it will be where you are.
There we go.
So
Where are you, Peter? Where are you?
I'm Massachusetts, so on the North Shore of Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's called, or possibly we could even get both of you to Scottsdale at the same time.
Just north of where I'm originally from, which is Connecticut.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's where I went to college. So.
Anyway, thank you both very, very much. I want to thank everybody who has watched it this evening. Thank you for joining us. There'll be a podcast available tomorrow. So if you have friends that you think would enjoy listening to this, you can find the link on poisonpen.com, and then there's a thing called podcast, and the video will live forever on our Facebook page, so Facebook video page. So spread the word, because it's really fun to bring other people into these conversations that might have missed it this evening. So Patrick, thanks as ever for your production, and good night, guys.
Good night.
Thanks so much.
Good night.
Take care.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.